we appreciate you, and we will benefit from your wealth of experience today. Welcome our audience from the Architecture and Urbanism Research Hub, University of Lagos. We've been on the topic, metaphor in local architecture. The first person to shed more light on that topic today is Mr. Tope Babade from the University of Lagos. He is an author of about 5,000 Yoruba proverbs and their interpretations in English. And I'm sure that he's shedding more light from the angle of language. So he's an accomplished author, and he's also in the environmental science of the Faculty of Environmental Science, University of Lagos. So we are going to be hearing from him for the next 12 minutes. You have the floor, sir. Mr. Tope Babade.
I greet everybody. The topic before me is we are going to discuss under the metaphor in local architecture. I'm going to be talking about language, poetry, and word. When we talk of word is a system of sound combination that has meaning to both the speaker and the hearer, and it can be written or spoken. When we talk about poetry actually is in many forms. In Yoruba, we have a lot of them. We call them sometimes ewi. That is, they are written in figurative language, and sometimes we repeat rhythm. So we also have them in various odes, like the Oriki, Jala, Eriode, Sunrara, and other things like that. There are so many words in Yoruba that we don't have English equivalent for. But all the same, we have them. In fact, the words too can go as far as forming what is called incantations, proverbs, and idioms, which in Yoruba we call Ashayan Tabi Isoro. And when you talk about language is a system of words, signs, which people use to express their thoughts and feelings. So we have to really move on because we have to move fast. We have a lot of things to do. Architecture actually is a discipline. Last time we have heard about how is environmental sciences and how it could be social sciences. That is, under environmental sciences, it could be, you can talk of architecture in line with the physical, chemical, and the biological situations of the environment and how they have effect on the organisms. Then on the social sciences too, when we talk of culture, anthropology, sociology, psychology, politics, economics. Now, on art too, when you talk of architecture, it involves creativity. So under art, you have what is called creative arts, writing, philosophy, and humanities. And why is architecture and art? Because we need to really know before we go into this area of language and all these talks we are talking about, we have to really know whether it even has relevance. When you look at it, it involves skills acquired by experience, study, observation. And when you talk about architecture, we are talking about occupation requiring knowledge or skill, and of which is conscious use of skill and creative imaginations in production of aesthetics, objects like the painting, sculpture, design, etc. So architecture actually could fit in as an applied art. Even some institutions put architecture under the parent of fine art and applied art. And language of the works of art. When you talk about language, every work of art we speak, they communicate, they really send message. They speak volumes in every vocation. It could be a furniture or casket making. For instance, we have some ingenious, very good casket makers that we design casket in line with the occupation or vocation of the deceased. They can have caskets shaped in the shape of fish. It could be book. It could be boat. It could be anything to really show that actually and it will speak volumes. Anybody seeing the casket will know that, oh, possibly the person who actually has died is maybe a fisherman or maybe is a hunter or that things like that. Then it could be fashion design too, sculpture, fine and applied arts. Then when we talk about the language of the works of art, we talk about the product is a function of comprehensiveness of the past, the present, and peeping to the future based on the training, ingenuity, and creativity. In that case, when we talk about the language talking in the works of art, you have to, it's a combination of the past, the present, and you peep into the future. Because when those people do design vehicles and 2019, they begin to say they are releasing vehicle of 2021 or 2020, they are releasing vehicle of next year. So they are peeping to the future in the work of art they are actually bringing to the market. So, but in this case, it involves both the cultural value, the tradition, societal norms, lifestyle, environment, aspiration, internal and external influences. We had a lot of this in Africa. They have influenced our norms, our traditions to a very great extent. Then a deeper message or communication is got from the words of wisdom. We talk about the proverbs, the idioms, the verses, odes, aphorisms, and which is an intangible part of our rich African culture. Metaphor of architecture. I love the quotation of Kovics, 2018, where he was talking in his work, The Metaphor of Architecture, saying that life and nature may sometimes be used as part of art's raw materials. But before they are in any real service to art, they must be translated into artistic conventions. When you look at this, the work of architects, they transport whatever they see, they'll be live with nature, based on the brief of the owner, of the client, they bring it in form of artistic inventions and conventions because they have to follow certain conventions. Then, so architecture is a useful art that represents and presents images of the client through the architect. Now, importance of metaphor in architecture. One, is very important. It's an important language of architecture for concept generation and cross-cultural comparison. What we do here is prohibited elsewhere. What I mean by this is that in architecture, you can really use it to compare when each zone, each locality is actually bringing about their own uniqueness in their design and their own culture, in line with their culture, aspirations, and other things. You can compare between localities. You can bring the one from other area to this. This is from here, this from there. So it allows for cross-cultural comparison. It makes the reader to comprehend less familiar terrain. When somebody is getting to a less familiar domain, the metaphor in architecture can help the person to be at home. For instance, now a stranger coming to Lagos, who is not aware that whether Lagos is a harbor town or whether it's very close to a beach. By the time you get to Alausa in Ikeja, and you see the monumental boat office complex that's under construction, you say, oh, for this to be here, that means something like an harbor must be around here, or maybe this town actually has to really be very close to the sea. So when you see the metaphor in architecture, it makes you to be familiar with the domain whereby you are operating. For instance, now Cocoa House in Ibadan. Had it been that building was done in form of a cocoa pod with upright position, anybody, you don't need to put Cocoa House on it for people to really know that, oh, cocoa, many people don't even know that we used to live on cocoa. But if that one had been there, people would be asking, what is this? Those young generations who are not here during that time, be able to be familiar with the domain. Then 3, problem solving tool, because metaphor can solve problems. That is, it makes reader to comprehend less, problem solving tools for dealing with design tasks between problem and remote domain. Then 4, it passes fundamental human experience of life, environment, and culture of the people from past to present and coming generation due to durability of architectural forms. When you have metaphor implied, embedded in architecture, it allows the human experience and the culture of the people to move from age to age, because architectural forms they can withstand generations. So many who are coming will know that, oh, their fathers or their grandfathers were living in this type of environment and things like that. And there's no need for us to discover our identity. Why? We had culture and the works of art, which were once subjects to envy by colonial masters. And they introduced their own culture and tradition, brainwash us that ours were bad and inferior to theirs, and exploit both our human, natural, and artifact resources. They were even stolen away anyway. So then, because of that, now that we now know the truth, there's now need for us to rediscover our identity, which had been mesmerized by the colonial administration and mentality. So now is the time for us now that we have known the truth to retrace our steps and uphold our identity as African people. Now, for us now to understand, to go to where I'm to really delve in. For instance, now, let's talk about the Yoruba poetic constructs in architectural odes. Poetic constructs relating to built environments are available in Yoruba and other African languages in terms of nature, man, human behavior. Metaphor can relate to human body, like in Katabu, gigantic elephant. Atari Ajanaku, kì í ṣe ọmọdé, the head of elephant is not a load for a child. When you talk about gigantic elephant, it's, some people, it becomes their alias, it becomes old, it becomes part of their oriki, which is the old of the family, whereby maybe they are known for executing gigantic projects. So, or they are the type that is big and all those things. So you can use to describe them. So architect too, who is designing for them, we know what they are made of, where they are coming from, the background, and try to input this into the design and make it now to be what will satisfy the client and even make the uniqueness of that masterpiece to come out. Some, they will say they are omekun. The young tiger cub resembles tiger. So all these things can be actually introduced. Maybe in their design, it could be like tiger opening the mouth. The mouth can be the entrance to the house. It could be, the house could be in the shape of the tiger, other things like that. Omayon, like for instance, this one I'm saying, Omayon, Onipa Kalamefa. This is part of the oriki of my family, of my paternal home. So whereby you talk about Omayon, when you talk of Omayon, Onipa Kalamefa, that is the side of iron tree of these branches. There's we have a tree called iron tree, which is actually where our town Ifala started or originated from. Well, we are from that household. And they normally refers to us as Omayon, Onipa Kalamefa, that is the child of iron tree that has 6 branches. So somebody can use, for instance, I have a project I'm doing now. I'm trying to incorporate that one into the layout design, whereby you have a trunk of tree, the entrance of the road to the estate, and have about 6 other branches that goes to the various houses and other things like that. So it could be incorporated in design, and we could also have it introduced to in architecture to really make sure that we have, for instance, by the time we have it and we call it Pakalamefa Estate, generations coming will begin to ask, what is Pakalamefa Estate? You can begin to tell them, oh, this is part of our oriki. Even that tree is no more now. I just got to know about the tree about 50 years ago, before the tree dies. So, but that thing will now begin to pass our past to the present and to the future, so that they can be able to know where we are coming from. Then we talk of Ombalogunundodawa, Omabishujoko Ijakadilorofa. All these ones are examples. My time is running out. Let me quickly run to where
you have 1 minute to round up quickly so that you can.
Then in that case, okay, let me quickly, just give me 2 or 3 minutes, please. Then those related to land too. You talk about the land of Ileowo, Kodegede. The land of Owo does not extend to Igede town. All these ones have to do with limitations and the boundaries when you talk about property and that things like that. All those ones are there. Let me quickly go to the. So we have them relate to buildings too. Small ni afimara loju of a home to another makes one to be askance for each other. So we have them. It can relate to buildings. It can relate to other things. Let me go to recommendations now. Architects should now globalize our local architecture by consciously coming up with creative, direct, and indirect metaphorical designs for the nature around us for sustainable image building. For instance, now Goas in Ibadan, as I mentioned the other time, could have been designed in the form of cocoa pod in upright position, which is at the tip end to form a conical roof. So Africans should rise up to love that which is African and be proud of our heritage. Let African tribe begins to develop a cultural identity in built environment space. In conclusion, ẹni tó sọ èdè àti àṣà ìbílẹ̀ rẹ̀ nù, àpò ìyà ló so kọ́. Anyone that throws away his local language, culture, and tradition is hanging a sack of affliction. We need to help ourselves by blowing our trumpets by ourselves. No one will help us. Thank you for listening. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. That is very insightful. Thank you for the depth in that study. While that lecture was going on, architect Bofu Ubodaga joined us. So we just want you to feel at home. Welcome on board.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now, the second speaker will be Dr. Stephen Folaromi from
Polarum, yeah.
Folaromi,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Stephen Folaromi from
Uh,
Rhodes University in South Africa. He is also a lecturer at the Obafemi Awolowo University in Applied Fine Arts, and he's an accomplished author. I read one or two of his articles, and I'm sure that we will be really imparted this afternoon. So, Dr. Folarin, thank you
yeah.
for coming on board.
Okay.
You
Good
can start.
afternoon.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. The introduction has been done, so I just go ahead, and I'd like to share
Would you
my
like to share your slides?
screen right away. Okay. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for having me. And I think I wish I was so vast as Dr. Babade in Yoruba. It's one of the things that a number of us are lacking, even though we grew up, but a lot of us grew up speaking English language. But I was lucky anyway, when I studied, I had a supervisor who insisted that I insert the diacritical marks on some of the Yoruba words that I wrote for my undergraduate. And since then, I'd had that interest in Yoruba language. And because of that, I've constantly started using a number of Yoruba words, metaphors, and proverbs, even as methodology in some of the things I do, because I find parallel oftentimes in some of the theories that we read in book and some of the things that Yorubas have observed for thousands or hundreds of years. So my title, just the title from what I'm supposed to speak about, is what Yorubas say about the dwelling place, metaphors and the house. And without dwelling so much about some of these things, a lot of these have been said with respect to cultural metaphors, and which I engage, refers to as archetypes of images that tap into collective reservoir. By reservoir, means by the depth of knowledge that we have within our society. People tap into that by observation, by relating ideas to concept, and so many other things. And then they provide quick and efficient means to construct a great general framework. And when we think about architecture, oftentimes you think about frameworks, planning, and so many other things that weave into each other. In this little piece, I'll be looking at Proverbs and Oriki. Much have been said with respect to Proverbs. I mean, there are sayings that bearings on the ways of our society. And most of the time, when you look at Yoruba Proverbs, there are things that people have observed over time. So, for instance, people say, Yoruba sọ pé lálá tó lókè ilẹ̀ ló ń bọ̀. I mean, everything that goes up will definitely come down. And oftentimes when we want to refer to theory and whatever, we start referring back to Isaac Newton or other theorists who have said issues with respect to gravity. Unknown to you that before then, 1600s, when Isaac Newton was saying that Yorubas have been talking about Lala Toroki, Ilelombo before that. And we also think about Oriki, which forms the basis for formal praise poetry. And Oriku could be a short word like in a name. So for instance, my name is, my Oriki is Ajao, but when you add other things to it, you start talking about Oriki Orile with respect to Ajao Eri. And then when you hear Eri, you kind of start thinking of the kind of family I must have originated from. And that will inform some of the things that you can find sometimes in Yoruba houses where people will put elephant or paint elephants on the wall or install elephants on staff and gates and houses and so on. I go on. And so, for instance, this image that you see here of a painting is a mural on the Ojo Abata entrance porch into the palace in Oyo. The images that were painted on this particular wall were said to be animals that were sometimes kept by the Alaafin of Oyo. But at the same time, they also relate to the kind of person the Oba was. So when you see an image like this, you see an ostrich. It talks about ostrich is called Eye Ogungu. and Yoruba call Ogungu as Ogungu Babaye. So when you're thinking about the Alaafin in that respect, you'll be thinking about one of the foremost kings in Yoruba land. And to give essence to that, to this particular wall, such several images, about 140 icons like this are painted on this wall, spanning from leopard, elephant, sword, the crown, the seats, and so on and so forth. They also even speak about the history of some of the events that are taking place in the palace. And a little history actually follows this story. And the history is what I will allude to, the Oriki of Oyo that's on the side here, who says, that people try to comport or act or copy what the people in Oyo do. And what happened was that when the person who created this mural created a little mural on the wall of his house, his name was Salami Alabebe, and the Alaafin Shinyobola saw it. He then summoned him to come and create that mural on the expansive wall on the palace in Oyo, so that everybody who comes to the palace will say that, wow, this is actually a Yoruba palace. And I mean, some of these things are the orikis that you find on this side here are some of the things that you then find on the walls of the palace. And you know, I mean, just hearing from what Dr. Babade has said with respect to cocoa house. But on the other end, my perspective here is that there's a word that says "Enitore Badan Tiko Dele Oluyole Oko Gilolo." Ile Oluyole, I mean, I think it refers to a certain time there was a house that is very, very important. In essence, if you go to Ibadan, I mean, you have not seen Mapo Hall, you have not seen Cocoa Hall because of their significance in the landscape of Ibadan. It looks like you have not particularly been to Ibadan. That was kind of like a central core around where Ibadan was located. In 1944, when Mapo Hall was completed, you have these 7 pillars. It is often said that the 7 pillars actually resonates from the 7 hills that makes up Ibadan. So you hear Okepadi, Okeado, Okebola, and so on and so forth. And that was particularly used to as an icon, as a word to build up part of Mapo Hall, even though this building itself is a kind of a colonial building, but certain things from the culture and the words and the landscape entered into such structure. When we also look at Yoruba architecture, I've looked at things with respect to courtyards in Yoruba architecture. That is the mainstay of traditional Yoruba architecture. It's a system where you have little small buildings adjoining together that creates an opening, but you have a central where a whole lot of things happen. And if you look at Yoruba Okmoefa, it just speaks to that space. And so I'm saying that I mean, it looks like the Yoruba were looking at that Okmoefa, which is a very central form of divination and religion among the Yoruba, to create a form of architecture in which they lived in. And in the next image, I mean, you see, we have different types of Okmoefa. That was a square one. This is a circular one. And when you look at what, if I went the Babalawo is even divining, you start talking about it talks about what happens within the central thing about the courtyard. The courtyard is a communal place within the building where people come out from different rooms and are joining and enter into that space, whether it's a shrine or a place to collect water and so on and so forth. So many things happen within that place. And it's also called about the crossroad within the Yoruba, whatever. And so here you see images of this is a courtyard in Ilesha Palace in the southwest Nigeria, and this is also a system in Idonre. The old Idonre Palace is on the hill in Idonre town. Similar thing comes to modern times. This is African Studies building in Obafemolo University Ilefe. The building was actually designed after the Yoruba Palace, even though it's modern, but they took that Yoruba central power palace thing and they used it to build this African Studies building where you have fine art, drama, Yoruba, and so on. And when you get into this building and you see all those things happening, it just reminds you of a Yoruba palace. And also coming off from the Okmoefa, if you look at the design plan here also, it also takes after that. From that African Studies building also, you see these two buildings. Here is Odudua, who is supposed to be the progenitor of the Yoruba people. And Odudua is often considered and said that one of his oriki, Odudua Afewonro. I mean, that is he who dropped down from heaven, with a chain. And when the Institute of African Studies was being built, something they took from that Oduduwa's oriki and used it as part of something that was used in building as an icon within the African Studies. So this chain has been here since the 1960s that this building had been erected. So it's something that comes from metaphors and words among the Yoruba that has informed the design and artistic concept within the African Studies building. In other words, I also look at Yoruba palaces, I mean, and when you want to join laughing will posi eliri. Posi, it's the coffin. Eliri is a little rat, which almost the size of a groundnut pod. And you know, when you look at this building, these gables were said to have emanated from one Oyo king called Oluaso, who built several of these in Old Oyo. I mean, and Old Oyo Palace was said to be one of the biggest in the Yoruba, with having about 100 courtyards. So when you look at this, and then you start seeing what we have now, this is Oyo Palace on my left here presently, and this is Ilesha Palace. You see the gables and the courtyards, and then you go here and you come to Obafemi University, the Natural History Museum in Obafemi University, which is an adaptation of that Yoruba palace roofing system. It's something that came off from that, and I mean, these are some of the interesting things about words and archetypes and types that we have in Yoruba architecture. The next one, this is Oshun Shrine in Oshogbo. You see that same gable thing, but a little bit different here is that there's a similarity to birds flying. And this comes also from when you talk in Yoruba, you say our mothers. And when you talk about our mothers, they are the mothers who are in charge of a spiritual essence, of shrines, of religion, and so on and so forth. So these houses looks like they want to fly. And it comes from that Awon Yawa. And Awon Yawa are usually often referred to, I mean, alluded to, like in birds. When you see the crown of the king among the Yoruba, you also see birds on the crown. And these are some of the things that comes from that place. Now, I move on to decorative items like doors and pillar posts. In Oyo Palace, these doors are from Oyo Palace. One of the things that Yoruba says is that may the doors of your wealth never be pulled down. The robes of your wealth will never be turned to rags. So doors are really very, very important. They form identity. They form gateways into a house. They speak of the owner of the house because of the icons that are sometimes embedded on the doors and the panels to show the wealth, to show the personality, to show the charisma and of the person who lives or owns the house. And such proverbs or aphorisms talks about doors and some other things that may be found and that embellish architecture among the Yoruba. Here you have Adeyemi Alowolodu flanked by wives and children with two pillar posts, which are veranda holding the roof of the house. One of the things about the carved posts that they are usually done by those who are referred to as the Okumuleru. You are the offspring of Okumuleru Moja Alekun. I mean, Okorosho, Okogbaja, Okokandudu, Okokanlogun. Wrap post with sash, the only dark post at the front of wall. You know, this post speaks of, number one, the pillars that hold the Yoruba cultural identity together, not just about the house alone, but also that traditional kingship system. That if we continue to have this traditional kingship system, there's a sustainability for us to start thinking about our architecture, our art, our culture within the space. If we no longer have them, there's a possibility that some of these things that we have, we may no longer have them again. So there's that idea that carved pillar posts sustain, they become a metaphor of power and politics and decoration within Yoruba palaces. Having said all this, you still see some things in modern times, from colonial architecture to adaptations of those things. When you see a house like this with pounds sign and this way, it's just talking about the owner of the house. At that particular time, people who are rich allude to themselves. I mean, he has money and wealth, and they build such houses, and they try to use symbols and icons that speak of that identity onto their house. This photograph was taken somewhere from Oyo. And in all of this, one of the things I'm thinking about with respect to this discussion is the fact that the Yoruba will say, one cannot stay in one's home and scrape one's neck. And I am using that to discuss with respect to, if we design houses that is convenient for us, if we consider our culture, consider our environment, consider our temperature, the tropical nature of where we live in, we might begin to start designing houses that might be convenient for us. Houses that we may particularly not need fan or air condition when it is hot, or some other thing. So in conclusion, I would say, if vernacular architecture has been said, is a means of building structure or constructed shelter of a group of people according to their ethnicity and culture, tradition, religion, and environment, which is constrained by their climate, then you can begin to use local materials that are unique to our futures. We must continue to consider this so that the proverb above will not be fulfilled. That means we don't sleep in our own house or try and stay in the type of house that we have built ourselves, and then we strain our neck. So I say thank you for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful time together. Thank you very much.
Nice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen Folaranmi.
Thank you.
Thank you for the in-depth expose on the main topic. You touched on so many aspects there. The next person please just stand by, because we will also be having questions. Then our next lecturer or speaker is Dr. Judith from KwaZulu-Natal formerly, and also that's in Durban, South Africa. So he will share it with us again from our own perspective. She's an accomplished lecturer and also published so many articles on that. So Dr. Judith, you have the floor. Can you share your experience? Thank you.
Host has spotlighted your video for everyone. Okay. Good afternoon once again. Thank you for the opportunity.
Can you pick up your bottom a bit?
Oh. I was just saying thanks for the opportunity to share. I hope we would find this a useful contribution. Just trying to get my video to work. Can you see the shared screen?
Yeah.
Where is it? Is the screen showing? Is my screen sharing?
We can see your desktop.
You have not fully joined the meeting.
Really?
Okay.
Is that working now?
Slides.
Okay, so you can see the slides now.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you so much once again for the opportunity. It's really nice, wonderful opportunity to share some thoughts on architecture and the metaphor in local architecture. I'm going to just quickly go through some slides on the linguistic concept of architecture, pattern language, then the built environment as a record of history. And then I'll just quickly look at meaning as in architecture. I will use two examples, one in Brazil, Spain, and another one in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And then I will touch on the interpreting of meaning and changes in meaning, and then look at the possibility of a pattern language model. So like we've heard from the other presenters, when we look at architecture, we actually have the linguistic concept, what you can consider the linguistic concept of architecture, which then sees the vernacular language taking its origin in linguistics paradigm, where vernacular refers to a colloquial form. Language as a scientific term can be understood as a systematic means of communicating feelings, which makes use of conventional signs, sounds, gestures, or marks to convey a message. So it implies two things. The first is that the built environment, we can argue, actually speaks as it conveys meanings, and that there are visible signs within the built environment that carry these meanings. And the interpretation of these signs are perceived differently, and that these meanings could therefore be subjective. So in the picture I've included here, just like we saw with Dr. Folaromi's presentation, the entrance into a dwelling space carries a lot of signs. But if we don't understand that language, we may not appreciate what the meaning that those signs are portraying. So pattern language, in traditional culture, there exist unarticulated patterns, which are commonly known and practiced by the collective. So those within that community, they will understand the meaning that is being portrayed, but others outside of it may not appreciate those kind of things. So in order to replicate any of these patterns, it's important that we actually make the pattern explicit. So it requires defining the pattern in terms of the context, the system of forces, and the, sorry, I've jumped a bit, the system of forces, and also the meaning that is being, the configuration that is actually bringing about these meanings. So the built environment, we can also say, carries a record of history. And in architecture, we would study different eras of architecture. And over this era, we can see changes, even as different things change. And of all these things that are changing, it would be in terms of the meanings that are actually embedded in the pattern. So it would be in terms of the context, the systems of forces, which could be political power, economic strength, and even the configuration that brings about. I mean, this is the Sagrada Familia in Brazil, Spain. I was opportune to be there, and a friend of mine said to me, why did I bring her to this Ojuju building? And I'm like, wow, that's not what the architect actually intended. But somebody who doesn't understand it sees it as something which has no meaning. So it definitely carries sociocultural meaning of the time in which buildings are put together. So meaning, space has a latent dimension waiting to be given purpose and character by the intentions and the activities, and will differ in meaning in terms of the ages, the expressions, experiences, and the intentions of the users. And we can see this in monumental buildings. We can see it even in buildings that are what we call vernacular architecture, architecture for the people by the people, buildings that are actually done without the architect. We can see some of these meanings actually being captured in the built form. The Zulu Muzi is another example I will look at. And it's in this case, we can see it does have a similar courtyard experience like the Yoruba architecture that we just saw. But in this case, the function of what actually happens within the courtyard is quite different. Whilst I think in the Yoruba system, we find exchange of goods and services outside of the homestay. In the Zulu Muzi setup, a lot of this exchange happens within the homesteads where the cattle are also stored. So there's exchange that is happening within the different homesteads. Interestingly, a lot of these type of architectural forms are gradually fading away. And I think within this context, we're having more of vernacular tourism, where we have buildings that are put together just to capture the culture of the society. I guess it's a means of preserving or passing down this culture, because a lot of it is being ebbed away. Now, in understanding the meanings that are embedded in these settlements, interpreting meaning, it's been, I think it's a challenging thing, and it also depends on who is actually interpreting the meaning, who is reading the architecture, who is reading the built form. There are two schematic diagrams I've put here of the Zulu Umuzi, and we will see one of the important aspects of it is the homestead or the rendezvous of the first wife, which is referred to as the Great Hut. Now, the Great Hut stays directly opposite the entrance. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So it sits directly opposite the entrance, which the two authors have captured nicely. I must say, this one by Walton is a non-African, a white researcher, anthropologist, and the one by Magubane was done by an African, a Zulu researcher. So the interpretation of the meaning in these two settlements are slightly different. Whilst they capture the positioning of the entrance similarly, and the Great Hut, which are the reference points to the whole homestead, what happens on the left, or what one calls the left, the other one calls the right side. A researcher has come up and defined that as saying interpretation could be based on where you are standing. So Magubane was standing on the inside of the homestead and referred to the right, to his right, as the right side, whereas Walton was standing on the outside of the homestead and interpreted the right as the left, if you get what I mean. And then based on the positioning of the Great Hut, which is the first wife's hut, every other person is positioned around her, either to the left side or to the right side. Even within the hut itself, which we call the Indlu, where the men sit and where the women sit is quite distinct in terms of either being on the left side or on the right side. So the interpretation of meaning in these built forms is actually, how do I say, it's actually known to the community of those who actually live in it, to the owners of this language. Otherwise, other outsiders could interpret it wrongly. So as we move along and as we see vernacular, what we've all called vernacular architecture, I do have a discussion I could have on that. As we see this moving, we see that the meaning of these architectural forms, either in terms of symbolism or in terms of the interpretation of the meanings that they carry, are being altered based on the context, the factors at play, and the actors within the whole setup. So you will see that in terms of context, I could say migration, where we're seeing vernacular architecture moving from the rural areas into the urban areas. The interpretation of some of these things could actually is actually changing, and how they are appreciated or reverenced is changing over time. Then the idea of modernization and globalization is also bringing about some of these changes. For instance, in Ibadan, I visited recently, and we would have the courtyard system in some of the outlying cities of Ibadan actually being, I would say, bastardized or even abused, in that the land within the courtyards are being portioned and sold out. So the purpose and the meaning that is held by those courtyard systems are gradually ebbing away. And then the power, or who is in power, who gives the authority. I see Dr. Babade also talked about the cocoa building. Who was in power then? Where was the economic power given to actually capture in terms of the cocoa building, to capture the essence of things at that time. So those are some factors that will bring about changes in meaning and changes in the type of vernacular architecture we will experience going forward. So in conclusion, if we are to actually narrow down or pin down a pattern language of any form of architecture, I mean, even in KwaZulu-Natal, I've seen where we have the rural-urban transposition of homestays changing as low-income households bring their dwellings into the city. And they're using different materials to experience or to express themselves in the built form. So again, it boils down to defining the context. What is the context that is providing the building materials for what we call, or what we want to refer to as our vernacular architecture? Who are the actors that are pulling it together? Where is the power to actually drive these cultural or sociocultural meaning that we want to lay hold to? And then what are the defining factors? Defining factors, again, will fall to our issues of the climatic conditions. Some of us are out of the country, want to build our traditional systems outside. Can it work? Will it work? And then those are the things we need to ask ourselves as we try to sustain the vernacular architectural language going forward. I think I'll stop there for now and look forward to some discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Judith. Thank you very much for that illumination on the topic from your angle. Thank you very much. Next on our list of speakers and lecturers, Dr. Judith, okay, thank you. Next on our list of speakers and lecturers will be an architect and someone who has that unique opportunity to have been growing up with a master of arts in Nigeria. Speaking of an architecture, speaking of Papa Demas Woko. So we will have her come and share with us her experience as an architect and also as a practicing architect for that matter, and someone who has learned, as it were, from the feet of the master. Architect Bofu Bodaga, you have the floor, please.
Thank you.
You might like to share your slides too.
Okay, yes, I will. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. And when I was told I was going to do this, I was like, okay, am I going to be talking about Dimas Woko, or am I going to be talking about myself? But anyway, it's been a very interesting discussion yesterday, I must say, and I want to say thank you to every speaker that we have had so far today. I will share my slides. Okay, it's going to be very simple and quite straightforward. We've been talking about metaphor in local architecture, and we've heard about it in different ways from all the different speakers, representational, in art form. Metaphor we know in different ways, not just in architecture alone, but in every art form, basically. I will start first by talking about metaphor in language and culture. Language, as we know, makes frequent use of metaphors in discourse. We've heard a lot of that from our speakers, especially in Yoruba, some of which I think they're going to have to translate to us later. The use of metaphors in language and culture, as much as it is symbolic, adds depth and weight to the meaning of something. It stresses an action or the import of an action in such a way that it expresses the possibility of something, otherwise not being impossible. Linguistically, metaphors take terms normally used in one with the objective of illuminating and making what brings us to design and architecture. Architecture, as we know, is a language. Language is an art. Arts, being an essential aspect of living, is just like breathing. Is represented in what a man, everybody does. The very act of innovation, creativity, its various modes of expressions, all of it is all wrapped up in how beautiful you make this turn out, either in form of a language, in form of a play, in form of a poem, in form of a building, whichever way you look at it. Anything that speaks is language, communication. Architecture is a language on its own, and it's a very strong one at that. It tells a story, it makes a statement, which can vary from subtle to strong. Architecture, as compared to other forms of art, like literary writings and plays and fine arts, architecture is in front of you. It is in your face. It is a language and an art that you have no choice but to see, but to experience, whether you like it or not. This gives architecture a particular strength and importance in the essence and life of people as a whole. And we as architects should not take this lightly at all, knowing fully well that we have an everyday audience in our profession. Architecture speaks a universal language, can understand it. Like, for example, we've had all those idioms and odes in Yoruba and all that. Somebody looks at the representation of it, doesn't have to read the Yoruba aspects of it, but can read the picture and the expression and the experience that is getting. So it's an expression, communication through buildings, embodying a message in an art that creates comfortable spaces to enable man perform his various roles and responsibilities. Architecture is encapsulated inside all this. A message, a language, an art, yet all put into the structure that enables man perform, makes architecture really significant and important. The use of design, metaphor in design and architecture. Some people would say, okay, the word metaphor, oh yes, the school of metaphor was derived somewhere in Europe at some time or the other. But then I would say the English word metaphor, probably yes. But in the life of man, metaphor used in architecture has always been there from the very beginning of creation. Metaphor is often used as a primary inspiration for design. A building in architecture becomes the final beautiful experience of the story. No matter how boring that story might seem, spoken in words. Architecture turns it into a really beautiful piece. In writing, written by final building is as a result of what we call a metaphoric thought process, the definition of design.
Hello? Hello? We lost her there. Maybe we'll let her come in when she's ready. But for now, we will have to move on to the next speaker, Professor Abdullahi Abubakar from Ahmadu Bello University, the head of Department of Architecture, and he has gracefully agreed to shed more light on the topic this afternoon. So Professor Abdullahi, you can go on with your presentation, please. We would like you to share your slides as you present. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, members of the Lagos University of Lagos Architecture and Urbanism Research Hub, and participants. It's a pleasure being here with you. This afternoon, we are going to be discussing, I've listened to various discussions on this, and I think it has set the background for my presentation, making it much simpler for me not to go into discussing more theory, but rather look at it in a more pragmatic approach. So for that reason, I'm going to be looking at it from the perspective of metaphors in the formation of Nigerian architecture. Rather, this presentation will raise more answers for us to ponder after this presentation, because it's a very, very important metaphor in architecture or local architecture. It's a very important approach towards having what we call local architecture, or rather what I call Nigerian architecture. But the most important thing probably we're going to be raising at the course of the presentation is that, are we willing to pay the price? So this will be really the key of the presentation. Now the presentation is going to look into, that is made into about 5 segments. That is, we are going to briefly, that is the introduction, metaphors in the formation of Nigerian architecture. Let's look at a case study and attempt. Then we'll look at the matters arising, which are the questions we are going to raise. And then finally, we're going to conclude. For the purpose of this discussion, having taken cognizance of the fact that we have a lot of practitioners and students also, I've decided to make it, just like I've said earlier, more pragmatic rather than theoretical. So even the definitions I employed for the purpose of this discussion, that is regarding architecture, I look at some, of course, as you all know, we can so many definitions depending on the perspective you are as far as architecture is concerned. But for the purpose of this discussion, I tend to go with ROT, that is saying that architecture is a shell of the human, what do you call it, habitation, or rather you call it, other definition, architecture is a sculpture for human habitation. You can see even in this definition that we're using a kind of a metaphorical definition to now define architecture. And local architecture, which probably we may call Nigerian architecture, is that architecture that is the response site, draw on local traditions, and also that is craft, then tries to create sense of community. And when we talk about sense of community, once you tend to be from different setting, different location, different region, and that is why local architecture is called these days more like a contemporary regionalism. So with this understanding, and we've been talking about metaphor and on all the background, different types of metaphor, visual, non-visual, conceptual, technical, and so on. I'm not going to go into that. When I say metaphor, I'm referring to all the definitions as it may be as far as metaphor is concerned, as being defined much earlier by other speakers. But I think we may have to take this issue of understanding as imaginative rationality. It means when you're looking at metaphor, as far as when it's related metaphor in architecture, you're looking at it from the perspective that you're looking at the design process that looks take cognizance of both the imaginative and objective, then also rationality that now has to do with some objectivity in order to come up with, while looking at identification and reference to that metaphor. Of course, the melting point, but when you talk about architecture, you talk about local architecture, you talk about metaphor, the melting point design, which is being defined as a problem-solving process, basically changing from existing situation to a preferred one, which is the future, what do you call it, situation, which is the preferred. And in between, of course, we have the design. And then that design, whether we call it whichever approach we employ, be it from the perspective of concept, from the perspective of issues, from the perspective of design theory, from the combination of design and issues, or rather you look at it from the other perspective, that is looking at it from different design styles, be it pragmatic, be it iconic, be it analogic, canonic, and whatever. Now we're saying that is where now the architects come on board, meaning that they move, that's why they are trained to move now from the existing situation to the preferred situation, and ways to do that, they have to take cognizance of the site analysis. They have to take issues with the requirement analysis, that is building requirement. They have to take cognizance of the demographic analysis. Then now comes in why the idea now and solution, and now which is where different approaches come into being. And here we're moving emphasis on metaphoric approach to our design as a problem solving. This now, with this background, I will now quickly move us to that is dealing with Nigerian architecture, which I referred for the purpose of this discussion, same as local architecture. Then that we have some case studies. Since I've said I'm more about the questions that I'm going to draw out of this discussion than the answers, I will quickly move, that is after the case study, now to the questions. Now, the first thing now we have, I have three cases. One is the Dala Building Society head office in Kano. The second is the Bank of the North head office, the former Bank of the North, which is now the Skyline University, Kano, and then the Ship House, Abuja, that is Ministry of Defense. Now, the Dala Building Society head office. You can see now on here on our, that is to this side, which is currently is my left-hand side. You see a photograph showing now where now in those days where we have the granite pyramid. We have the pyramid here, and then we have it now, they are forming the pyramid of granites. Now, the designer of the Dala Building Society here on the right, if you see it, you realize that he's trying to use a conical approach to the front of the facade of the Dala Building Society head office. And which is, as far as it's concerned now, this is a metaphorical architecture. So the second case study is that of the Bank of the North head office, which is the now Skyline University in Kano. You realize that what you're seeing here is what you call the inspiration comes in from the Northern Nigeria logo, which is called the Daigin Area. Here, you look at it, this portion and here is what this portion represents by the architect, they are El-Waziri and Associate. While here, you realize what they have to do is now they take part of this and now put it into this area of the building. And that's why you're having this using some, what do you call it, aluminum strips on it. But I want to take one note, because yesterday, I think at the presentation, somebody also raised one question, talking about, when you have, because talking about the Yoruba Cup, the crucial issue of it, and then by the time you get to the building, you don't see it anymore. Actually, as far as architecture is concerned, that's not the essence. The essence is coming up with uniqueness. Is the uniqueness, because when you use it, definitely the uniqueness is not that. In fact, when you represent, when it comes out exactly as the cup, then you're no longer doing, that is using a metaphorical approach into the architecture. So it's the uniqueness. That's why when you look at this and this, now when you look to those that really understand it, can really see the idea there. But those that don't, but they will appreciate the uniqueness of it, which is as a result of these symbols or logo. And as time goes on, you realize that since you are now using the culture, the symbols are coming as part of the culture and on Baba or non-Baba, you realize that it means that this shape or these forms that you're going to come up would be unique. And then whether if it's from Yoruba or that's from Igbo, whichever tribe in Nigeria or whichever part of the world, then it means that you're going to have some unique shape that will be peculiar to this area. Then you have the ship house in Abuja, that is the Ministry of Defense. You also agree with me that is the uniqueness. And one other very important thing I want to quickly also highlight here is that you have to agree also that the uniqueness, because the ship, easily, you don't just see the ship there. But if you really sit down to analyze it, you can really, yes, appreciate, and that the fact that you have the ship as a concept, the basic idea, because from the idea to the concept, certainly you have a kind of a transformation that will pull you out of the original concept. But however, what you're after is the uniqueness of the shape, of the form, or rather, if you like it. Now come the questions, which really, if we said we've heard from different scholars telling us about these metaphors and so on and so forth, how we derive them and so on and so forth, then suddenly something for nothing doesn't exist. That's my opinion. There has to be a price for it. The first question is, are Nigerian architects willing to pay the price? The second, are the schools of architecture willing to pay the price? The third, is the government or political class willing to pay the price? And the fourth, are the clients willing to pay the price? Now, the first question, are the Nigerian architects willing to pay the price? Certainly, you will agree also with me that when you're going to use metaphorical thinking towards evolving a design, a quick approach will not pay. You have to now go on research. You have to follow, you have to collaborate. Let me use that word. It's no longer just architecture affair. No, you have to follow the linguist. You have to follow the environmentalist. So it means you have to follow the fine artist. At this juncture, I must even tell you that of recent, a meeting with the new Vice Chancellor of Ahmadu Bello University's area, he raised a question that the new phase 2 of ABU's area is feeling that we need to have a character of it. And a discussion went on, and as I'm talking to you, it has been, the Vice Chancellor has agreed that the fine art department and architecture department will come together to collaborate so that the phase 2 of Ahmadu Bello University, the phase 2, will now have a character. So it means that architects have to pay the price, one, in agreeing that collaboration has to come. Number two, yes, that before you take up the idea and transform, and research has to come in. So that's for that. Are the School of Architecture willing to pay the price? In other words, that the schools have to not only now predominantly be everything about architects. We have to move out of the schools. We have to collaborate with the fine artists. We have to collaborate with the linguists so that the students right from school understand the essence, why they have to, and so that they can begin to understand, to work in collaboration if we really want to have the architecture that is Nigerian, to get to that level of Nigerian architecture where our buildings will have that character of uniqueness. Then is the political or the government willing to pay the price? A government giving you a brief, asking you in 1 week or 2 weeks to come up with the solution. I don't think that would. Here, I will just quickly tell you, last year I went to a conference at Stanford University. We've been taking on campus tour. We were taking on campus tour. That tour, at the course of that tour, we met to understand, I met to understand each and every structure that has been built there of recent. takes an average between 6 to 1 year. 6 to 1 year from brief to that point. That is from the time the client says, okay, whether a competition or selective procurement process, they have to go in with. Now, from that point where the commission, that is, they identify the commission, the architect, to the point where the university will agree with the brief, that is the programming, and what it requires, and even the series of presentation to agree on what needs to be. That is, yes, this is what we require, because virtually all stakeholders will come into play in order to actualize it. That is that. So are the clients willing to pay the price? Now I'm talking about more private clients, that is private corporate organization, apart from the government and political class. Of course, here I would say, even though at times they put in little time, at times they give more time than probably the political class or government in terms of having the patience to wait for the architect to conceptualize, pass through the process, come up with a kind of go through the process of metaphorical thinking to develop a design. But still, they also need to, because from the time you start thinking about a project, putting it into your budget, in my opinion, that is the time you need to start that process, so that you give the architects ample time in order to carry out the process, the cycle, in such a way that at the end of it, that is the form will end up coming up with that uniqueness, we can be able to see it, and that identity she will be able to come on board. Taking cognizance of the time, we have to quickly move into the conclusion. Like I said earlier, first and foremost, the awareness, the stakeholders, especially government and clients, because that understanding, that awareness is so important, because without which, definitely issue of architectural identity, Nigerian architecture, will just be a mere mirage. Then, like I also mentioned while I was trying to discuss issue of the cases, Nigerian architects need to also appreciate the fact that collaboration is key with other allied professionals and other fields of human endeavor at the cost of commissioning, that they have to consult. They need to give in their input, and so that collaboration will lead to Nigerian architecture, that we have what we call architectural identity. Then finally, I also have to say that that is the regulatory body and the Association of Architects, which is the Architects Registration Council of Nigeria, and Nigerian Institute of Architects, need to do more towards the realization of, that is, Nigerian architectural identity through metaphoric design. And I think at this juncture, I also want to once again thank the Architecture and Urbanism Hub for this clearance call. And I want to believe this is the beginning. And the more we continue to raise this part of the awareness campaign, and the more we continue to go into these kind of studies and more of discussion, certainly it will lead us to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that brilliant insight. Thank you. I want to find out whether Architect Bofu Budaga is back online.
Yes, I am.
Okay, please, just in a few minutes,
I'll just basically wrap it up.
Conclude your thoughts.
Okay. I'll just share my, can I share my screen again?
You're on slide?
Yes, my slides. Can I share it?
Yeah, share from where you stopped.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry about that. I obviously went on and on, thinking I was still connected. Okay, was basically talking about metaphor in design and architecture. So I had said, I think the last thing I said was metaphor is a spoken descriptive phrase that when used in architecture, it throws light and meaning and identity to creation. It is structured in such a way to give clarity, direction, that's orient, and provide reification. Reification here means changing something that exists as a thought or words into something real. This is the essence of architecture. I'll go straight on to talking about some types of metaphor in architecture and use some examples, both international and local. Okay, I talked about architecture. Here we're looking at architecture first of all, using the metaphor in different ways of design. It can be universal. It will be difficult to talk about. I'm sure everyone knows about him, his pieces as buildings. So his work is usually more universal in the sense that you can identify with what he's talking about or what he's trying to portray. He's somebody who seems very fascinated with flight and has not more than once used the symbol of a bird in its movement to create fantastic sculptural pieces like that which we see here. The Museum of the Arts in Milwaukee shows the wings of a bird, and you can see motion and flight within this one structure. And he's a master of engineering as well, because he then adds on engineering to it to actually make these parts move. Now, this is a more universal form of metaphor, because everyone, no matter where you're from, you can identify with it and sort of understand it. Then we have the ones that are more scientific. I chose the Tatling's Tower. It was never built. It was designed in 1919. I chose it mainly because the metaphor here that Tatling was worked with was drawn from Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity, understanding space and time to be fluid, malleable, and intertwined. Right here, he has what he had done. At the base over there, he has the base of the building basically houses like lecture halls and sorry, just give me a minute. The base venue is for lectures and conferences, and it translates. The base actually rotates once in a year. Now he's bringing this and PT for learning. That means all through, year in, year out. And the next level, you have a smaller cylinder that houses executive activities. This completes a rotation in 1 month, using this as a period to establish evaluating decisions made by executives. And then the top one is a smaller, houses the information center, which rotates daily. Here he houses, like information, dissemination of information, radio by radio, which should be done daily. Here we see a connection between space, time, and function. Then I'll go on quickly to talk about metaphor in terms of social and cultural. We've heard a lot about cultural in motifs, in language, in Nigeria. Metaphors can be steeped in culture of a people. The stronger the expression of the culture of a people, the more you see it playing itself out in all that they do. And architecture is definitely not left out. That's why we would ask ourselves, how come we have such bland architecture these days in Nigeria, considering the fact that we have such strong cultural identity that no matter where we are, we still identify with it. The bigger picture tells the story of a people, and at the same time, in more detail, the story of its owner, the reasons, or its functions. Cultural metaphors of a people adds strong, unique identity in architecture. Culture comes together from a people's way of life, an environment which affects their choices, whether they like it or not. The strength of architecture as a powerful cultural metaphor cannot be overlooked. You cannot avoid it. It stares you in the face. It's all around you. You live in it. You walk in it. You relax in it. With this, I'll bring this discussion quickly home to Nigeria using the work of our great master builder, Dimas Nwoko. I would use the chapel of the Dominican Institute because it's an embodiment of different metaphors all put together to create this one structure. In African culture, worship is deep, very deep, hence my choice of this particular project. It's really inseparable. Most of our culture is rooted in moral ethics and spirituality. So most of the messages we send, and this is why you can see a similarity in depth between different religions, Christianity, Islam, various traditional beliefs practiced by people here in Nigeria, because it's the same people. So we practice these things the way we know. One of the things that a pastor or a minister would say as soon as you come into a building is, like in my language, they would say, "Bulite n'obi unu," which means lift up your hearts to God. Now, why do they say this? It's a phrase that impacts on the congregation when heard, causing them to respond by bringing their mind and their spirit in an uplifted, reverent focus of worship. In this building, the Dominican, Dimas successfully transformed by creating as you come in, right there, that's the Dominican. Now, as you come in, this is the entrance into you can see my cursor, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is the entrance into the building.
Yeah.
So I'm showing this from the top to sort of basically describe the flow. As you come into the building, all around here you have the seating. And then right there at that corner, under it is where you have the altar. So as you come into this building, instantly you can see here, this is what the altar looks like on the inside. It's got light thrown in from the top, right down over and above the altar, directly facing this entrance. So as you come into this building, instantly, you don't need the pastor or the priest to tell you to lift up your heart. You just go in and the building speaks to you. The flow, you basically just lifts yourself up and the flow takes you straight to the altar and up into this light shaft, bringing you into this position of awesome reverence before God. Now that's a combination of metaphor in action and actually having an impact on the user. Also, in the same vein, here you see communication of intended purpose and the words into action by design. Design solution to a need, a metaphor translated to achieve both symbolic and functional success in design, not a metaphor just for the sake of a metaphor. Here, we also have one other striking thing about the design in this chapel is the seating layout. Right there, this is inside the chapel. These are the seating layouts. It works out basically in the round. This is just one half of it. The altar is right there in the center, as you can all see. This symbolizes unity, bringing together, and is also functional in the essence of what is needed to be achieved in a church, which is the coming together of one body before God. We're all seen as one body before God. We also have a connection between the arts and worship, both demanding a pulling together to feeding into and out of the center. Into in the sense that, and then out of the center, you have the priests feeding out to the people. We see this represented in the sitting arrangement.
Hello? Hello? We seem to have lost her again. Can we bring her up again? No. So can we, hello?
Within the chapel.
Come back again.
Sitting in the round with the altar as its focus. Dimas's use of traditional carved columns. Yeah, can you hear me? I'm here. Okay, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We cannot hear you again. Can you please?
Can hear you.
Yes. Hello? Hello? We seem to have lost her again. We'll quickly move ahead. We'll quickly move ahead and see how we can get some questions and feedback from the audience. We'll join. If you have a question, can you just put up your hand? Actor to be Callistos, can you ask your question? And we'll quickly take that. You unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
Okay, so please, your question quickly, please. Actor Callistos, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, speak up, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to appreciate the speakers for a wonderful renditions. And I also want to appreciate those that organize this because it's bringing our mind back to what traditional architecture should be, but even more on architecture. And our traditional architecture is losing the flair. But thank God that the organizers is trying to bring our mind back to what originally should be. Like, what my worry is this: if you go to China, you can identify that this is China because of their architecture pattern. You go to UK, you can easily identify that this is UK. You go to the Americans, you can identify that this is American. But why is it that we Nigerians cannot be original? There's nothing original about our architecture. Even to the fact that some people still, like the Chinese government, will come with the architecture and our own people will approve of it, and it will be built in the Nigerian soil. Look at all the Chinese embassies or the Chinese chambers of commerce. These are foreign architectures. And what can we do to preserve our architecture as Africans? I am asking, is it too much a price to pay for us to stand up and say, yes, we are...
Okay, I think you made your point there. Actually, hello. Actually, I think we've gotten your question there.
Voice is heard.
Architect Callistos, can we? Hello, Architect Callistos. We've had your question, but let us have a response from Professor Abdullahi. Professor Abdullahi, you heard this question? I think
I can hear you.
He's basically talking about
thank you.
Identity. Can you respond to his questions quickly in a few minutes? Hello, Professor Abdullahi.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, can you quickly respond to his question?
Yes, I think his question, as far as I'm concerned, is very straightforward. In China, you see, when you look at the concept of governance in China, that's why we said the political class, the government, is a situation whereby, and again, you have to also understand that China, unlike us, they have a kind of thousands of years of civilization. And based on that, also, we have to also appreciate the fact that the concept of governance, whereby the authority play a very major role towards ensuring giving focus to virtually all areas of human endeavor, and architecture is one of it. So in my own opinion, one of the main reasons is that right from day one, they have this focus that they have to have a defined, their architecture ought to have a defined character. One. Number two, even their schools of architecture, the concept, the kind of training they have in an education in their schools of architecture has to be, the curriculum has been designed in line with that. And thirdly, we've been talking about the time frame. I want to assure you, definitely, if you look at the time frame, the architects take in other words to giving to design, and from brief to that is to realization, that is up to the second stage or third stage. You will also realize that certainly the government is playing a very critical role, and certainly since the government is leading, other stakeholders, clients, and other party ought to just have to follow. So I want to believe that one of the key areas is that if the government have to give us, that is, give a direction, and this direction implies that, one, for instance, government projects have to be via competition. Two, we ought to, the design ought to have character that probably we're going to be, when you come to conceptualization, you should be able to say how you drive it metaphorical from within the Nigerian culture, be it wherever, be it Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, or Tiv, or Angas, or whatever requisite, then I assure you the
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof, for that straight answer to the question. But I have a question for Dr. Stephen Folaromi.
Okay.
I'm reading it to you, sir. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. How do you propose to have metaphor aid the problem-solving process of architecture, given our peculiar economic challenges and the cost implications of these highly unique and organic concepts?
Okay.
Thank you.
I often don't think in relation to money in that aspect. I'm not an architect, so neither am I a quantity surveyor, so I don't deal with calculations so far. But one of the things I've noticed is, our critical mind, and this is the question that also relates to what the last person asked, which is, how do you have an identity? One of the major things about identity is the fact that we even relegate ourselves. I mean, some of the things we do locally. For instance, many people don't want to patronize somebody like Demas Nwoko. Many sometimes even don't think about him as an architect. And I mean, is one of those buildings that you look at, I mean, kind of an affective architecture, an architecture that really ministers to you. I've been in buildings where once electricity goes, there's a trouble. Of course, we shouldn't be thinking about electricity going in the 21st century. But the question lies in the fact that many of our cultural values, our visual culture, I mean, we need a lot of visual learning in our society, from elementary school to high school and so on and so forth. In so much that people thinking about other stuff don't think about the local language or the culture when they are doing it, when they want to carry out something. So even from our academic gowns in universities and so on, I mean, I like the kind of academic gown that Unilag uses with that kind of a cap. That's something that brings from your culture. If you go to Ghana, you see their lapels and whatever with those. Even when you go to the US, you see some US universities using local fabric that comes from Africa on their academic gowns. But here we are, when we design our own building, you just take something from Spain, and land it here without considering. I mean, we can borrow. I like to borrow ideas. Things that are good in our culture, we retain. Things that we think that we need to improve upon, we can borrow and match them all together. And I don't think it's all about cost sometimes, because I've seen people even build houses in Nigeria. I mean, I work in a university and we have professors here. A professor is building a house at age 60 and is building several rooms and large rooms. That is the time when most of the children are out of the houses. Why don't you even build a small house that look and take into consideration of your local environment and use that as a model? And I can give an example. There's a house in Ile-Ife built by Professor Mrs. Oshasono. And in building that house, she had incorporated a lot of elements from Yoruba architecture, from the facial boards to partitions within the house, and incorporated those buildings. And if you check out, there's an article published in Nigerian Field, I think maybe 2013 or 2014, where she discussed local architecture in Nigeria and used that house as one of the base elements. And I don't think it really cost so much. So I think the first and foremost is start thinking local. And when we say local, it doesn't mean that local is substandard. That's another thing. If you say, I want a local thing, people sometimes think it is substantial. I am dressed now. This fabric is not substantial. It is quality fabric, but it is local to me because this is how I think I want to dress. So I don't necessarily have to put on a shirt or a trouser. Not that I'm saying that shirt and trouser should not be worn or I will not wear it. I do wear it very well. But this is ways by which you can start thinking and doing it. And if we do it over and over again, you find out that our architects, our builders also will start looking for materials that will work along together with this concept and idea of what we need to do. I mean, if we do that, I am sure that we can the quantity surveying, the builders, the urban and regional planning can look at things that we can do within our environment to make things particularly work for us.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for that wonderful question. Answer. I'm looking at Acting Shehu. Shehu is raising up his hands. Can you unmute yourself, please? Shehu, Architect Shehu.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Please quickly go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mine is a contribution on what Professor Abdullah said on government, clients, and other regulatory bodies, whether we have the patience to pay and to be able to inculcate that spirit of having our own identity. The truth of the matter is that it will not be that easy seeing what we've been doing. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. Please make it brief, please.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Most government projects commences immediately the budget is signed, and you realize agencies will tell you that they want the designs to be completed within 2 months, 1 month. So how can you have an identity with that kind of short period? So I'm agreeing with what Professor Abdullah said. We really need to have who will pay for those kind of time, services, and identity. The identity cannot be created just with the kind of rush things that we normally do. Thank you very much. That's my contribution.
Yes. And I think Professor Abdullah shed more light on that earlier on. But I want to read a question that I have here from Olubi Babalola. Thank you, Dr. Judith. You have to respond to this. I realize the constraints imposed by time, but a quick into the pattern on language methodology you posted in the last slide would have been nice. Maybe there will be a presentation on this down the line. Are you willing to do that next time, Dr. Judith?
Yes, thank you. I think definitely a lot of the discussions that are coming up, we can tie it down theoretically to some of these things, because we can tie it down theoretically to the context, the actors, the power. Where is the money coming from? Who's giving us the time to do some of these symbolisms that we want to see and bring out the metaphor in the built environment? So it's definitely we can narrow it down to interrogating the context, the factors at play, and definitely the actors. Where is the power line? You know, so that those metaphor can actually be exposed or be expressed in our built environment.
Okay, thank you very much for that. One more question, and we might need to be closing because of time. What role does emerging landscape design have in the metaphor of Nigerian architecture? I'll let Prof. Can you answer that question again? Because you are the architect and you are also in the school and you know what, and you are the head of your department. So we want you to throw more light on that and see how you can help Nigerian architecture and see the way forward. Briefly, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Johnson. You see, the fact remains that, and that is why I continue emphasizing on collaboration. Because landscape architecture, when we look at landscape architecture, you realize that the setting, the built environment is not made. In fact, let me give you an instance in traditional architecture, like in Hausa, you have what you call dandali. Dandali is not that we have structures there, it's an open space. But somehow you could also say that is a subset of landscape architecture. So it means that when we're talking about metaphoric architecture, because the setting, the environment as a whole, not only the micro, macro, that is meso and macro, are all involved. Meaning that how we design our towns, how we design our neighborhood, and how we design our building. So it means that when we're talking about landscape architecture has a very great role to play as far as having a structure. Now take, for instance, you have a structure usually in the developed world. You have a very dwarf wall there. And that dwarf wall, all you need to do is move to your garage. And most times you realize that whatever they do, they don't make, most part of the world, we make certain more use of that, and which somebody could say, well, architects can do also that. But as far as I'm concerned, yes, architects, but when you have the specialists that are main trained to look at that area, basically it means, like I'm talking about linguists and what have you, when you collaborate, then everybody come on board, then it means that having that character, we're talking about having that identity, we're talking about, that is the way that will take us to achieving that. So the key, landscape architecture have a role to play, and that is why what we are talking about and what we are advocating is that it's not just a one-man show. It's not just for architects only, because we are saying metaphoric architecture or identity, architectural identity. No, everybody have to come on board. Those that have direct input with the built environment, and the linguists, because we're talking about the social, non-social, the culture, the values, and what have you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for shedding more light on that. Another question that I'd like to take quickly before we go, we'll go to Mr. Babade, who is an established author. How do we drive this ideology in our universities? Can you shed light on that?
Thank you very much. Yes. Really, what I want to really say about it is this. We need to really amend maybe you can adopt a curriculum that really puts all these things into play. For instance, I remember the time we were in school in those days, the first 3 years of those who are in environmental sciences were more or less taking so many courses in anthropology, sociology, sciences, engineering, everywhere, so that it could prepare you for all these things. To me, if the program that we are running in universities now is adjusted in a way whereby we can make them be able to study locally, because I remember in those days, most of the architects of nowadays, a lot of them were trained by foreigners. The Italians and others that came in the 80s and 70s, but all the same, now that we are here, what matters is what that Prof. Abdullah said. The first thing is that let's have the awareness. Let's be ready. Let's be prepared. Let's be ready to pay for the price. Once we're ready to bear that, we can just adjust the program, and the NIA too can put up a program that we train and retrain the architects in the consciousness and implications or applications of local input in their design. So when we have that, I'm sure that thing will be able to better, because really, fortunately, the first thing is awareness, and that's what is happening now. With the awareness, every university will now have it in mind that they have to really adjust their program to incorporate that one. And at the same time, the NIA too can begin to run a program that will assist those who are in practice to be able to have that inculcated into them. I'm sure with that, to be able to go a long way. Then most importantly, the government. If government is able to really buy into the idea and they are encouraging it, it will be, for instance, let's look at the local materials now. Most of the constructions that we're having, or the buildings we're having, are very expensive. Why? Most of the materials are imported. And whereas we have the building instructional research, we have local materials that we can use as substitute, but when government agencies are not even patronizing them, how will the public begin to do it? For me, everything has to do with orientation. Once we're able to move forward, I'm sure it will be done at all levels.
Okay. Thank you very much. Architect Ayibofu is back. Can you just answer the questions that we would like to just, we want to read from one of our audience? Every response seems to be put in, put the solution. Every response seems to need a solution at the foot of government. And how do we deal with that to show that we don't misunderstand the aim of discourses like this? Actor Bofu, please, can you just use that to round up your thoughts?
Yeah, okay, I can speak on that. The point of waiting for the government to do anything is the point of actually not wanting anything to be done, especially in the arts, of which architecture is one of them. We are the creators. We are the one that creates expressions that make people change their minds through our creations. And it's been rightfully said here, one of the points of cause is our schools. We do not need the government's approval. They're not architects. If it's an architectural school, you are the one that's going to tell them what is necessary. You are the one that's going to tell them what you need to do. If we're talking about identity in architecture, we have to teach it. And it's easy. It's just basically teaching our way of life. That's what identity is all about. It's not telling somebody to go and start to teach about how to draw one masquerade on top of one building. No, it's much more than that. It's in-depth, it's in our culture. That's why I said when I was making my presentation that no matter where we are, we still identify with our culture. So this is easy. And let us start from our schools. Let the curriculums change. We don't need them to do that. Let us speak the language we understand. Look at the buildings we have. Okay, look at, I live in Abuja, for example. Look at the federal secretariats. Massive buildings on the outside that look like whatever it can be from anywhere else. Go inside, it's been turned into rubbish. Why? The people don't live that way. They don't. You have to design for the people, and you don't need the government to tell you to do it. Yeah. And if I can add a bit on cost has no factor here. Cost is what's the word? It's affordability depends on your if you're designing just a kitchen or a house for one widow in a village, if you apply the principles of how she lives and how she would enjoy that space, it will speak culture, it will speak identity, and it will be at the cost she can afford. And you can do the same to large buildings as well. So cost is not necessarily a factor either. It's up to us, the architects, to make this happen. And we should start from our schools. NIA, yes, professional courses, we can jump in and start to do all that as well and promote what we know is true. Look at it. The only African architects that are making a mark in the world are those that have identity in their work. Doesn't that tell us something?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that insight. We missed a lot of your presentation due to one reason or the other, Architect Bofu. We would like you to share your slides again with me so that any one of our audience that is still interested in that, we can throw them back at them to see it. And we will still come back to your presentation in detail when we have another set of programs to do that. At this point, I want to thank everybody, Mr. Tokwe Babade, Dr. Stephen Folari, Professor Abdullahi, and Architect Bofu yourself. And Dr. Stephen, I want to thank you for joining us at the shortest of notice. And Dr. Judith, I will not leave you out. I appreciate your coming on board, and we hope that this sparks the beginning of new collaborations in future. From the Architecture and Urban Research Hub, we want to thank you for giving us your time and experience to affect a new change in the architecture of where we live. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.